Trump's brief itinerary lists several bilateral talks with no mention of Albanese. Tensions between the two leaders have increased over trade tariffs, critical minerals, and the AUKUS Defense Pact. Let's bring in Hayley Channer, director of the Economic Security Program at Sydney University's U.S. Studies Center. Great to have you with us. Does this give us an indication, the lack of a one-on-one sit-down between the two leaders, of where the relationship is headed and potential pitfalls ahead?
Well, the Australian Prime Minister has been attempting to get a meeting with President Trump for quite some time. Luckily, Australia's Defence Minister, Richard Marles, did meet with his counterpart last month in Washington, D.C. But I think when you look at Prime Minister Albanese and President Trump, they come from different political parties. They have some very different priorities for their nations. So, for instance, in Australia, there is a high emphasis on clean energy and the energy transition. In the United States, Donald Trump is much more interested in energy dominance and in defence. So you see a little bit of different priorities, different political parties. But it is very important that the Australian Prime Minister does eventually meet with President Trump. Hopefully that could happen at the end of October, early November in Seoul, where they will both be there for the APEC meeting. But that meeting could also be dominated by the first Trump-Xi meeting in about 5 years' time. Xi and President Trump have not met yet, so hopefully there can still be a meeting with Prime Minister Albanese if they really get their ducks in a row.
You would think that Washington would be interested in building this non-Chinese supply chain around some of these critical minerals. How consequential could this be for the U.S.-Australia alliance?
Yes, that's exactly right. I think one of the areas where Australia and the US could work together much more closely is on an area that President Trump has mentioned for years he is really interested in, and that is critical minerals. Now, while the United States wants to do a lot of its own mining and processing domestically, it simply does not have all the critical minerals that it needs. And so it needs partners like Australia that have rare earth elements and other critical things that go into not only energy sources, but a lot of defence capability. So, for instance, there's a strong link here between AUKUS and critical minerals because there's more than 4 tons of critical minerals that go into a Virginia-class submarine. So the top priority for any prime ministerial and presidential meeting will be a critical minerals accord. It's one of the areas that's underexplored in Australia-US relations, and it's one area that both leaders could see eye to eye on. The trick for Australia, though, will be in convincing President Trump and his administration to invest domestically in Australia. Right now, the US has invested a lot in minerals projects in the United States. They've invested in Australian companies to mine in the United States, like Lynas Rare Earths. And President Trump has also spent a lot of money, actually a historic deal earlier this year in July with MP Materials. There was $550 million US dollars spent on that rare earth company, as well as Apple putting in $500 million. So more than $1 billion of investment in that one mine. Australia would really like to see some of that US investment come to Australia and some joint ventures so that we can both co-develop this critical asset.
What about what sort of investments are needed from the Australian side? More public investments into rare earths?
Yes, I mean, that's a priority of the Albanese government as well. They have a critical minerals strategy, which is looking to invest more in Australian mining, also in just mapping these critical minerals, because although we know we have a lot of them, we don't know exactly the quantities and what will be involved in terms of actually digging them up and then the processing. So over the next few years, we will see the Australian government invest more domestically. Even Australia's Resources Minister, Madeleine King, has floated the idea of a floor price for minerals. That would be a total game changer for the industry because China is really dominating the critical minerals space. It's able to flood the market with a surplus of minerals to take the price. And giving a floor price to Australian critical mineral miners would really give that industry confidence. But more than that, it would give banks and superannuation companies confidence to make longer-term investments in Australian mining. And I think one of the other areas for Australia-US cooperation would be what third-party countries could possibly do the processing. We see a lot of processing happening in Malaysia. There's questions over whether that could also happen in Vietnam. So there's lots of underexplored opportunity here and much to discuss.
Underexplored, but also it does make you wonder whether the competition for the likes of Australia is just with China, given how some of these other countries, you name a couple of Southeast Asian ones, are enhancing their processing capabilities. How else can Australia capitalize on all this?
Well, one of the ways would be actually to work with a buyers club of different countries. Countries, not just the United States, but Canada, South Korea, Japan, perhaps the UK, perhaps even India. I know that the Quad, Australia, US, Japan, and India, have been thinking and talking about critical mineral supply chains for quite some time now. Basically, no country can go it alone. The US can't do it alone. Australia can't do it alone. The problem is actually getting these countries to coordinate, especially in an era when countries are more focused domestically. We even see, that relationship between the US and India really under strain with tariffs, and India and Prime Minister Modi talking about how India should make more things domestically. What we would like to see is less trends towards countries going it alone, more of them coming together to talk about filling these supply chain gaps, because for several decades, China has invested in its state-owned enterprises, in mining. There is easier permitting, etc., and lower environmental regulations in China. For any country to kind of compete with those decades of investment and the head start China has, countries will need to come together for the investment, for the mining, for the processing, but most importantly for the offtake. And sometimes you have to work backwards, understanding what are these minerals actually going to be used for, and then deciding where to invest and how the projects will evolve.
How well positioned is Australia in playing the mediator role? We have seen, of course, Beijing trying to increase influence in the Pacific Islands, something that's very important for Washington as well. When it comes to other broader geopolitical risks, how well positioned is Australia in dealing with all of these other countries as well?
Yeah, great question. Australia has been pretty busy this year working with the Pacific Islands, with Papua New Guinea, with Vanuatu, Tonga, to kind of work out some of these security deals, because Australia knows that it's a competition in the Pacific, and Pacific Island leaders are very savvy. They know that there is geopolitical competition, and they're trying to negotiate as best they can for as much as they can. Australia has been a very long-term partner for Pacific Island nations in terms of development aid, in terms of working with their national police forces. And we even saw a Papua New Guinea NRL, National Rugby League team, that will be coming through to Australia. And that is a big soft power initiative. But recently, Australia has been trying to negotiate a defence pact with our nearest neighbour, Papua New Guinea. And that recently fell through this week. I wouldn't say that that is a broader commentary that China is winning the strategic competition. I would say that domestic factors in Papua New Guinea, including its independence day arrangements, made the timing very difficult. But the bottom line is that the Pacific Islands are in a geopolitical hotbed. They would be a place where a country like China might want to stage military activities in future. But the Pacific is also highly attuned to the needs of its nations in terms of reducing the impact of climate change. And so Australia can work more closely and more strategically by helping the Pacific in terms of different climate change initiatives. But there should also be engagement from the US, from Japan, from South Korea, other countries, to help these nations in the Pacific develop and bring them more within our strategic orbit so that it remains a stable and safe region.
Hayley, great to get your insights. Thanks so much. Hayley Channer from the U.S. Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. We'll have more ahead on Australia ahead every Tuesday at 10:40 a.m. if you're watching in Sydney, 8:40 a.m. in Hong Kong. Plus, you can tune into the Bloomberg Australia podcast, which delves into the biggest stories shaping the country's role in global business. Find it on Apple, Spotify, or Bloomberg.com.